Hello, everybody, and welcome on back to the College Superpicks Podcast. Once again, I am continuing my rankings of the top 100 starting quarterbacks for this 2024 college football season. If you haven't seen the first two parts, just go back and watch them. It's a lot easier to follow along in the newer ones. If you've stuck through it and you are watching each episode as they come out, welcome back. Let's get started with numbers 50 through 26. Number 50 is Michigan's new quarterback, Alex Orji. Alex was the fourth string for Michigan last year. That'll just show you how deep their QB room was. But he has seen some play, getting 3 rushing touchdowns and completing 1 pass, making him, aside from Dylan Raiola, the least experienced quarterback on these rankings. However, we know this Michigan offense doesn't need a good quarterback to succeed. All they need is a solid QB. And I think around here, if he plays to this, number 50 spot, he will be solid enough for them to win 9, 10, maybe even 11 games this season. But we do need to see more of him for sure. We haven't seen anything out of him. Michigan, they are returning not much from that offense last year. Donovan Edwards is coming back, Colston Loveland, but the O-line is all new. The receiving core is inexperienced, and of course the quarterback position brings up a lot of question marks for the Wolverines. I do think Alex Orji will be able to succeed early on for the Wolverines. At number 49 is going to be another young first-year starter, and that's Michigan State's Aiden Charles. Charles spent last season with Oregon State, and though he didn't get much playing time, what we saw out of him was great, with 300 passing yards and 4 touchdowns, also adding 3 more rushing touchdowns on the ground, throwing 0 picks all season long, and getting into 9 games for the Beavers. Now he's following his head coach to Michigan State, a team that started off really hot in 2020 and 2021, pulling off some big upset wins, and especially in that 2021 season with the Heisman candidate like Kenneth Walker. They were one of the better programs in the Big Ten, but since then they have fallen back, haven't made a bowl game since. A lot of their team just left in the portal. They just had a big head coaching change, but I think they're going to have a bounce back year, especially with Aiden Charles at the helm. He's got a ton of potential. The former blue chip prospect can lead them back to the promised land. Curtis Rourke is back for his 6th year of college football, but this time he's switching things up as he has transferred to Indiana. After spending 5 years at Ohio and winning the 2022 MAC Conference Player of the Year, he took a little bit of a step back last season, only throwing for 11 touchdowns and 5 picks after a 25 touchdown season in 2022. I think he can have a big bounce back year under Kirk Cignetti. He is one of those low ceiling, high floor type guys, these veteran 6th year starters that can't really get much higher than this spot, but to be honest, he can't get much lower. He performed at a lower level than expected last year and still ended up being one of the more solid QBs in his conference. I think he'll be able to do that again this year for the Hoosiers. Continuing down the rankings, it's going to be number 47, Ethan Garbers. Garbers joined UCLA after his freshman season, where for 2 years he was the backup for longtime starter and current NFL QB Dorian Thompson-Robinson. Last year, Garbers was in a deep quarterback battle with true freshman Dante Moore and veteran Colin Schlee. Garbers lost the battle and ended up being the backup behind the 5-star recruit Dante Moore. But when Moore played worse than expected, Garbers actually got a lot of playing time and ended up playing better than Dante Moore did. However, this UCLA team is switching conferences. They've got tough competition this year. They've got a tough schedule. They got to play LSU out of conference as well. This team did not get any better in the portal. If anything, they got a lot worse. He does have a good target at receiver in John Michael Sturdivant, and I think he will still take a step up, but I don't see him getting much higher than this number 47 spot. At number 46 is Houston's Donovan Smith, and let's just say that Donovan Smith is a ball player, 6'5", nearly 240 pounds. He's a pretty highly ranked NFL draft prospect, but hasn't quite been able to put together a breakout season at the college football level yet. In his first 2 years as a starter due to Tyler Shuck's injury at Texas Tech, he had 2,700 yards, 19 touchdowns, and 10 picks. And at Houston last year, he threw for basically similar stats with 2,800 yards, 22 touchdowns, and 13 picks. He's a dual-threat QB as he can get some stuff done on the ground, and he is a solid player, but Houston isn't a great team, doesn't have really any supporting cast around him, so I don't know how big of a step he'll be able to take this year, but I do think his size does make him a legitimate draft prospect for the NFL. At number 45 is Diego Pavia, who would be higher if he had any sort of supporting cast, but he transferred to Vanderbilt in the SEC, and he had more wins against SEC teams than Vandy did last year, most notably leading his New Mexico State Aggies to a huge blowout win against Auburn down the stretch last season. New Mexico State had its best year possibly in school history because of Pavia, who took a huge step both passing and rushing last year to become one of the best dual-threat QBs in the group of 5. Now he's transferring to Vanderbilt, but I do expect his stats to take a step back. But despite the competition, I do think Pavia is going to be a good QB for Vanderbilt, and if they do win any games that we maybe don't think they'll be able to win right now, it will be because of him. I think Pavia is a top 50 QB in the league right now. At number 44 is going to be Malik Murphy, the transfer from Texas for the Duke Blue Devils. The big fella transferred after Arch Manning and Quinn Ewers returned to the Texas offense to be the clear-cut 1 and 2 QBs on the team, and Murphy's going to be the starter at Duke. Duke's going through a head coaching change and lost a lot of their offense in the portal, but I do think Murphy will have a good season. He's got a strong arm, like I said, big guy, 6'5", 230 at quarterback. He's going to have a breakout first season, and I think he's got a lot of upside, and I think the Blue Devils have themselves a pretty solid QB after losing Riley Leonard. TJ Finley's at his 4th stop after a huge breakout year that we had been waiting several seasons for. After starting his career off rough with LSU and Auburn, dealing with injuries and not living up to the hype, Finley transferred to Texas State, where he wasn't even projected as the starter at this time last season. However, he had a breakout year and has one of the better arms in all of college football, also being sneaky on the ground. Now he's going to Western Kentucky, which is possibly the most quarterback-friendly team in all of college football. We've seen Bailey Zappi and others like Mike White put up insane stats for Western Kentucky. They are almost a lock for any QB to have over 4,000 yards as they run that air raid offense. They're throwing the ball every play. They've got fast receivers. This is a high-powered Western Kentucky offense that plays against some, let's just say, not great competition in the CUSA. I think TJ Finley's set up for another great year, being one of the best QBs in the group of 5. Next up is Roco Beck, and going into last season, the redshirt freshman just didn't think he was going to play. Being a backup for Hunter Deckers, who was a solid enough QB. Still young, Beck had a few more seasons to sit on the bench, but Hunter Deckers got hit with a year-long ban, and it was going to have to be Roco Beck who would step up and lead the Cyclones, and that he did. They had a really solid season, and Beck had a solid year stat-wise and on the field. He's going to do it again this season, still young with a big career ahead of him, and just in general, I think Iowa State's a very sneaky team. We've seen them kind of come out of the corner of our eyes before and have a good season. I think this could be that year again. Way back when Dillon Gabriel, one of the best quarterbacks in college football right now, was playing for UCF, he went down with an injury, and Mikey Keane had to step up. Keane ended up playing just as well and earned himself a starting job 2 years later at Fresno State. He did not disappoint and led the Bulldogs to one of the better records in the Mountain West, and I think he's poised to do it again this year with a lot of his best weapons on offense returning and the Mountain West Conference not getting any better, especially with the quarterback problems that Boise State is going through right now. I think Fresno State probably has the best quarterback room in the Mountain West right now and could have one of the best offenses in general in that conference. That is going to be mainly due to Mikey Keane. If he can play like he did last year, then they will be the best offense in the Mountain West. We're inside the top 40 now with Baylor's Drennan Finn, who is another case of the multiple-year starter, low-ceiling, high-floor type player transferring in from a group of 5 school that has had some success. Now, Baylor has been in the dumps for the past 2 seasons, especially when they got upset week 1 against Texas State last year. It's been a mess ever since they were able to win the Big 12 back in 2021. However, Finn is a good step in the right direction. This will be his last season, but last year he had his best year for Toledo. The 3-time 2,000-yard passer has had some solid seasons and should be able to have another one at Baylor. It'll just be interesting to see if the Bears can build a good enough team around him to get back to a bowl game. It's hard to believe that the former blue chip backup for Georgia is already in his 4th season of college football, and he hasn't really had any experience. 12 for 21 for 2 touchdowns through the air doesn't give us much to go off of, but obviously he was a big-time recruit coming out of high school. He was in a quarterback battle with Carson Beck at the beginning of last season. I actually thought he had a chance to start. I thought Vandergriff was the better QB before Carson Beck earned the job from Kirby Smart. Now Vandergriff's finally getting the starting chance in the SEC with Kentucky, and I think he will have a breakout season. He just has too much potential not to have a breakout season and at least play solid in his first full year as a starter. Next up is going to be Wisconsin's new quarterback, Tyler Van Dyke. And when Tyler Van Dyke first came up for Miami, he looked like a top 10 quarterback in college football. However, since then, he hasn't been great. He's dealt with some injuries, and just hasn't been able to replicate that same style of play that he did in the first season. However, Wisconsin could definitely change that, as they haven't had great quarterback play in a long time. They've often been on the opposite side of good quarterbacks like Graham Mertz transferring out to Florida, and they are due for a transfer QB to go their way, and it could very well be Tyler Van Dyke. We know Tyler Van Dyke's got a lot of talent. Started off last season red hot, got up into the Heisman conversation in the first 3 weeks, and after that he fell way down, got way out of there, ended up getting injured again towards the end of the season. It was a rough year for Van Dyke, but there were some highs, there were some lows, and to be honest, that might just be what we see again in 2024. Joey Agular is another QB who at this time last season was expected to be just a backup, then showed why he is one of the best QBs in college football. Joey Agular had 4,000 plus total yards last year with 40 total touchdowns for App State, who was one of the best teams in the group of 5. He's expected to do so again as App State returns a lot of their talent from last season, aside from running back Nate Noel, who transferred to Missouri. App State is expected to be near the top of the Sun Belt, and they had some big upsets last year, and they always do. They're always the big sneaky team. I learned that the hard way when they beat my Aggies on the road a couple years back, and this year they've got a chance to do it again with Liberty at home early on in the season. That is the group of 5 game of the year. It's circled on a lot of calendars, and it's a chance for Joey Agular to make a big statement, and I think he might do it. You probably remember all the way back in the 2019 Big 12 championship game against Oklahoma when Baylor had to turn to their third-string Jacob Zeno after some injuries. Zeno was a freshman, and after that championship game, he did not throw a touchdown pass for the entire rest of his career at Baylor. He was a backup for UAB in 2022, but in 2023, he burst onto the scene as one of the league's brightest stars, finishing second in all of college football in completion percentage and throwing for 20 touchdowns. With little to no supporting cast at UAB, Zeno had a very impressive season last year, and I think he can do it again. However, it's going to be tough for this guy to repeat what he did last year because Kyle McCord had an incredible receiving core at Ohio State last season that I think I could have thrown a couple touchdown passes to. Cade Stover at tight end, who was a very highly drafted player, Emeka Egbuka, who's currently one of the best receivers in college football, and of course Marvin Harrison, who was one of the best, if not the best, players in college football last season. But it still wasn't enough for Ryan Day in that offense, so they went into the transfer portal and got Julian Sayin and Will Howard. Also, Devin Brown is a very solid backup, so Kyle McCord hit the portal and he landed on Syracuse. The Orange are an interesting team because they are returning Aronde Gadsden, who is on paper the best receiving tight end in all of college football. He had almost 1,000 yards receiving in 2022, got injured in the first game in 2023, didn't do much last year, and the running back LaQuint Allen, he had 1,000 yards rushing. Syracuse always an underrated team at the halfback position. Should be a good season for McCord, but I don't know if he'll be able to repeat what he did last year. Number 34 is former Clemson 5-star Cade Klubnik, and let's just say that though his stats haven't been too bad thus far, Clemson fans are not happy with how Klubnik has played lately, and they are just waiting to return to that Deshaun Watson, Trevor Lawrence type quarterback play that they're used to, because DJ Uiagalelei wasn't great either, and they were just begging for Klubnik to come into the game, and since he's been okay. He's obviously got a ton of potential. It's through the roof. He could win the Heisman tomorrow, and I wouldn't be too surprised because that's his potential. That is the ceiling for Klubnik, but he has not shown it just yet. I think it'll come soon, though, and I think this will be the year that Clemson fans get what they've been waiting for out of Cade Klubnik. Number 33 is going to be Will Rogers, and Will Rogers has had some great years with Mississippi State, especially under Mike Leach. He was the perfect scheme fit for that air raid offense, and I think he'll have a good year at Washington. However, you can't ignore that he didn't have a great year last year with Mississippi State, but you can't just kind of chalk it up to being a rough year for Mississippi State in general. Their offense was not great, had little to no weapons, also dealt with injuries. It's going to be an interesting year for Will Rogers, and he's fallen down a little bit in these rankings, but I think there's a big chance that he just comes right back up and has a great year. Next up is Jackson Arnold, and though we haven't seen much out of Arnold yet, we do know that he's an elite prospect and that it isn't going to be too tough for him to succeed in that Oklahoma system because they've had some of the most consistently elite quarterback play in all of college football, if not the most, over the past 10 years. Arnold has some decent tools and even better receivers around him. I think that Oklahoma offense will have another great year with Jackson Arnold as their guy. Number 31 is going to be Kansas State's Avery Johnson, and we know Avery Johnson has a lot of speed and even better hair. He was really good last year with Kansas State in the time that he had as the backup for Will Howard, who is currently the starting QB for Ohio State. Avery Johnson has a huge ceiling, fits that scheme at Kansas State. They run the ball a lot, and Avery Johnson is a scrambling QB. Probably going to be good for about 700 yards on the ground this season as a quarterback. That is elite. We saw him go off in the Pop-Tarts Bowl against NC State last year, and I think it's going to be more of the same for the Wildcats to expect from Avery Johnson. After a defensive collapse in the second half of the season, Caleb Williams was obviously leaving for the draft, and USC was going to be in need of a quarterback in the transfer portal. That was not the case because Miller Moss ended up having a great game in their bowl game, better than a lot of Caleb Williams's down the stretch. So Moss has the starting job. Lincoln Riley has named him the starter over Jaden Maiava, who they did get out of the portal. I do think Moss has the higher ceiling and could be the next great USC quarterback. At number 29 is USF's Byron Brown. Byron Brown is the leader of one of the best offenses in the group of five and is one of the better young prospects in all of college football. He's still got 2 more years of eligibility after this one, and last year he popped off for an incredible year, both on the ground and through the air, and is one of the best fantasy college football quarterbacks playing for USF. He's got a great number 1 receiver in Atkins, and he should have another good season. The scrambler was really young, took over for Gary Bohannon, who had kind of messed up that offense for a year or so and led them to a big-time bounce-back year and a huge bowl victory last season, and I think he'll be able to do that again. Next up is former Texas A&M quarterback Haynes King, now of the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. Last year, he had a breakout year with Georgia Tech and led them to a winning season, throwing for a lot of interceptions, but also running and throwing for a lot of touchdowns. He is a very solid QB. You may see him in a couple people's top 25s. Not quite there for me, but I do think he's one of the more underrated veteran QBs in college football. He's got another year of eligibility next year, could come back for his 6th season, and he's got a big test week 0 against Florida State. The second to last player I'm going to talk to you about in this video is going to be the drone strike, Kyron Drones. Kyron transferred in from Baylor to Virginia Tech before last season and was going to be a backup for Grant Wells, but quickly showed that he was the better QB and led them to a very solid season out of nowhere. Now, they've got the most returning production out of any team, and that includes Kyron. I think they're going to have a huge season, maybe 9 wins. We saw some people picking them to win the conference. They're kind of the sleeper team in the ACC, mainly because of Kyron Drones. He runs the show there, another 2-way scrambling quarterback there in the ACC. Lastly, it's going to be Preston Stone. Preston Stone was a former blue chip prospect who signed with SMU, ended up being a backup behind Tanner Mordecai for a couple of seasons, and then burst onto the scene last year. And what do you know, they were one of the best offenses in college football because of Preston Stone. He had a great season, got injured, couldn't make the conference championship, but they won it without him. Then lost in their bowl game, but Preston Stone was a big reason they had so much success to get there in the regular season. He's one of the better quarterbacks in the ACC. We've talked about, is this 3 straight ACC quarterbacks here just outside the top 25, and Preston Stone, he could have a great year and get up in there soon. That's going to do it for today's episode. Hope you enjoyed it. We've got 1 left after this one. I don't know when I'm going to come give it to you because week 1 and week 0, they're coming up very quickly. I'm going to make my picks for those games. Could have some special guests. Could be making a ton of picks, as many as 40 games. I am ready for this season to start. But if you enjoyed this episode and you want to see more, please like the video, hit that subscribe button, and I guess I'll see you in the next one.